Arrowhead's former CEO, Johan Pilstedt, who stepped out of that role to become the chief creative officer, recently described Helldivers 2 as a never-ending ping-pong between It's So Over and We're So Back, but went on to say that the studio was trying to get better with each update. Now, this comes to us from GamesRadar, who had a chance to sit down with Pilstedt at the Golden Joystick Awards. But this is extremely important for context as we next dive into this difficulty versus Glazer versus Grunt Fantasy discussion. Quote, weighing in on the occasionally rocky road that Helldivers 2 has traveled, Pilstedt reckons, quote, the community has coined it really well. It was a never-ending ping-pong between It's So Over and We're So Back, and I think that's sort of the way that we'll continue developing the game. Obviously, the folks at Arrowhead aren't sitting around a table deciding how to purposefully engineer the next It's So Over arc. These things just happen. I mean, we're trying to get better with each update, Pilstedt adds. But then again, I think the essence of the team is what you see in the game as well. And I think that's true for almost all game development studios. He finishes with this. You see the efforts of those individuals that are there at the time and the mentality of the people that are there at the time. And when you make a game that's about bumbling fools, you can sort of realize where that comes from. How interesting is it that Pilstedt actually finishes up with that bumbling fools reference? I mean, that could not be more on point. Anyways, to say that this cycle of highs and lows with Helldivers can be described as a ping-pong effect is actually extremely accurate. We've all seen, or at least heard about, the meme graph over the past, what is it now, approaching 2 years' time? From the highs showing up here of the Patriot mechs rolling out, I mean, we all remember that one, the Halo ODST Warbond, the Xbox launches, but on the flip side, we also see the lows here of the DSS launch, the escalation of freedom update, bloated file sizes, and all those promises of optimizations. To the final slide, where the community has actually just gotten to the point of stepping back, and I just noticed my banned thumbnail there on the meme. That's interesting, but the point of all of this is that Helldivers 2, and in turn Arrowhead, has seen some of the most stratospheric moments of glory and success offset by soul-crushing lows a studio has ever experienced. But the real question, which I'm going to dive into today, is why? Why does Helldivers hit the stars and then come crashing back down to the floor with a sickening thud over and over again? And for that, we need to turn to the source of this Helldivers spin cycle and cast an eye on the very ones to blame for this, the studio themselves, Arrowhead. Recently, we've seen a series of point-counterpoint videos hit the YouTube scene, and I'm going to cite both of them in this breakdown. The first of these is from OhDough, titled Helldivers 2 is turning into a game for no one, and the other is from CommissarKai. Helldivers 2 has a perspective problem. Now, I'll include links to both of these creators and their work down in the video description, but they both bring light to two differing approaches to Helldivers 2. They tend to be on the opposite ends of the direction to take Helldivers 2 in the future spectrums, but what they consistently agree on is that the game is all over the place, swerving from lane to lane as it tries to coexist in a fun-to-play horde shootersville versus pseudo-milsim expect pain way of life. However, in order to understand them both, we need to understand at least two fundamental facts about Helldivers 2. The first of these is that, for all intensive purposes, this title was created from what can only be described as development hell. No pun intended there. And the fact that it actually released it all after that many years in development is simply remarkable. But the point I wanted to make is that a game that comes out of 8 years of development has seen and been through a lot of iteration cycles. Games that take that long have probably seen a free-to-play push over to raids, a full-on milsim experience, a straight zombie-esque horde-style experience, and pretty much everything in between. Now, who knows exactly what Helldivers 2 saw in its life cycle, all the attempted and scrapped styles, but what was born from that 8 years is still actually evolving and very much at war with itself. The second of these fundamental facts, and this is actually very telling about the game's direction, comes to us direct from Johan Pilstedt, who spearheaded the game's development, where he told us back in May of 2024 what kind of experience Helldivers 2 was truly about.
So Helldivers 2 was originally envisioned, this is the original hypothesis, is that Helldivers is a co-op action shooter where you play as the evil guys in the galaxy, so your stormtroopers or whatever it might be in pop culture. And how would you fare as one of the extras in the background? Like, you know, when they try to breach the cell block in Star Wars, and the first stormtrooper through the door, he of course gets shot in the chest by Han Solo. And that's the question of, would you do better climbing into that room trying to capture the bad guys that are trying to take over your lovely Death Star? They should have realized that Death Star is... we can get into that later. And then also, would you be able to survive in a galactic war without plot armor to protect you? It's really the question that we ask with Helldivers. And this then turned into the original vision for Helldivers, which is that we wanted to do as realistic of a take on what it would be to be in one of those squads of stormtroopers or starship troopers, mobile infantry, or whatever pop culture grunts that you can imagine.
You see, the term grunt or grunt fantasy was used way back then by the studio's CEO to describe what the game was supposed to be, where we're put into scenarios where we don't have access to plot armor or skill trees or massive levels of progression, and we are essentially the red-shirted Star Trek extras that appeared in that week's episode solely for the purpose of getting owned, because you couldn't kill off Captain Kirk, Spock, or Bones, but the extras wearing red shirts, yeah, they were cannon fodder. And when you take this into account and you look back on Helldivers now armed with this knowledge, especially for those of us who were there at the beginning, and after hearing, of course, that statement from Pilstead himself, and when you combo it with the now famous, or infamous, depends on how you look at it, 2024 post by Patrick Lasota at Arrowhead outlining their ideas on weapon balance, you really start to get an idea for what Arrowhead actually intended with this game. And to be honest with you, it's a bizarre take. And even now, when I read this and watch it all over, it still makes me shake my head. And forgive me for dropping in this reference here. Don't flame me down in the comments if you are a massive fan of this title. But reading here again through this Lasota blog post and watching these videos about Helldivers' vision and how the game was supposed to be, how you're meant to be underpowered and expendable, it really started to remind me of Darktide. Now, as someone who had never experienced this game until recently, I took it on faith and I listened to Anatar, one of my longtime friends and Discord mods, who said that this was a great gaming experience. He said we would stick side by side, shoulder to shoulder, it was going to be fun, and we would tear through this mission together. In reality, as soon as the mission started, he sprinted off with his perfectly crafted invisibility build, wildly slashing his knife, letting his bloodlust get the best of him, leaving me moving many times slower than the enemies chasing after me, hopelessly shooting a weapon that might as well have been throwing cotton balls out of its barrel, and it left me feeling miserable. After our session, I uninstalled the game, and to this day, each and every time he asked me to squad up, I decline. Helldivers in its early form was to be a take on this Darktide formula, bringing into the fold milsim elements, all kind of blended together into what can only be described as a pain simulator. And for context, I'm not a super sweatlord player, and I'm not a casual. I kind of fall somewhere in between. And I can say, honestly, that in my daily life, IRL job, family, and all the stresses life has to offer, I don't need to spend $40 on a game that is uniquely qualified to add to my stress levels by consistently placing me in situations where my weapons are too weak, my stratagems are consistently affected by negative modifiers, and everything in the game is either faster or more powerful than I am. I'm just calling a spade here, but I get my ass handed to me by real life on a weekly basis, and I use gaming as a way to escape that torture chamber, not to add to it. Know what I mean? But here's where this Helldiver story takes a dramatic and hard turn, because despite this bizarre extra on a Star Trek episode take on a shooter Arrowhead envisioned for the game, we as the players actually found a way to overcome all those deficiencies and power through. We found the outliers and used those to our advantage to overcome all the negatives that were at that time stacked against us, and to really get to the heart of Helldivers, which I still believe is what drives the game today, and that's just to have fun. Back then, it was the incendiary breaker, shield backpack, railgun combo, and we rode that triad to early victories in the Galactic War until the spreadsheet balancing and pick rate mumbo jumbo took over. Back then, we were succeeding at a rate that was counterproductive to Arrowhead's internal narrative for the game, and that had to be altered. So began what we still see to this day, this wild swing between player power fantasy, meme-producing horde-style shooter, where the fun is the shooting and frenetic combat, offset by this other side, where the game swings severely in the other direction, where outliers that Helldivers can use to gain advantages are quickly found and eradicated. Quasar cannons self-charging, fire versus factory striders, overpen with melee weapons, all gained us unintended and kind of outlier positive effects, all quickly removed from the game. Included in that other severe realism vibe are power levels being lowered, at least for us, damage against Helldivers being increased dramatically, and the now infamous word of realism being used to justify decisions made to reduce our player effectiveness, but also to justify enemy buffs and modifiers against us. And this all contributes to these wild swings of it's so over, we're so back, as different factions of the player base actually begin to enjoy their desired version of Helldivers, only to see it ripped away when the next update drops and for the game to be turned on its head over and over and over again. Now, we could also add into this ping pong effect the extremely untested and half-baked updates and how the studio just continuously stacked broken shit on top of broken shit, leading us, the community, to take the unprecedented step with a live service game, and that we requested that the studio just please stop the content updates and instead take the time necessary to fix the damn game. But for Helldivers, it's important to look all these decisions over and kind of take it all in for that final effect. Now, I can't confirm any of this, so take this all as speculation, but I think for many within the community, they look at Arrowhead as a studio with its own civil war of sorts for the heart of democracy, that being what kind of game Helldivers is truly supposed to be. Because on one side, you've got these fun, fantasy-embracing devs. They see the game and how players flock to it, pushing the sold units up to nearly 20 million because of the fun, insane combat the players get to engage with, and they want to lean fully into that idea. Now, recently, Arrowhead's CEO was quoted as saying, and listen to this, quote, "It turns out that if you give the players what they want, they'll be happy." Wow, what a novel concept, right? And it seems like the logical thing to do. Make all the weapons fun to shoot, give the players a metric crap ton of things to shoot at, create difficulty and challenge by installing unique enemy types and missions into the game, and continue to just ride this wave of unprecedented success. Just make it fun, and the players will do the rest. But for every yin, there's also a yang. And for many, they see Arrowhead as having this super niche Tarkov and space milsim shooter dev faction that has this ever-present fetish with this fantasy, and all else must be bent to its will. Any weapon that is picked too much must therefore be too powerful and needs to be nerfed. In-game bestiaries and indexes for all the hidden damage effects in the game aren't needed because Helldivers aren't meant to succeed. Remember, we're the red shirts, and therefore we need to die over and over again. Weapons need things like drag and sway for realism while also making them not fun to shoot. Enemies receive these secret buffs left undocumented and nowhere in the patch notes, raising durability while also lowering the status effect damage our weapons do against them. Even when a patch that is announced as a massive and sweeping Buff Diver 2.0 bonanza is brought to the game, this internal faction is seen as making adjustments to the game so that everything ends up being an actual net zero effect. And through it all, after this theorized internal dev faction war kind of plays out, it then metastasizes once the community gets a hold of the game post whatever the latest update is, and we get to see things like, for example, the Coyote, and how they said it had not been altered, but everything to do with how effective it was versus enemies and how much burn damage it did had been altered. I honestly haven't decided which they are yet, but they're either afraid of what the community will say about the latest patches, so they say nothing at all, or they just don't care what the community will say. At this point, they've kind of made their money. The game sold so well that they can self-fund their next title. And at this point, they've just kind of checked out. Now, if you've watched any of my videos or been around my channel for any length of time, you know I have no problem speaking my mind and calling it like I see it. And at least for me, I see this issue of what direction Helldivers should go in, either prioritizing fun and shooting versus being an underpowered pseudo-team-based milsim, as a heavy majority in favor of fun. It was the fun, frenetic combat sequences, and only in Helldivers moments, that got the game to this level of success, and at least for me, that's the direction it should continue to embrace. Why should the devs continue to engage in, as OhDough calls it, Monkeypaw balancing, when all it does is strip away layer after layer of the player base until it gets down to seriously low body counts, all in the name of their bizarre initial vision for the game, putting us into situations where we are served up as snacks to interstellar foes, again, all in the name of realism. I've also seen Kai's video discussing difficulty, where he embraces the other side of this argument, backing the thought that the game was designed that way, and despite all the spreadsheet balancing and studio-driven decisions, through the use of coordinated team tactics, all situations can be overcome, despite our weapons and stratagems consistently falling just below breakpoints and, you know, all the rest of it. Basically, both sides of the advertising on the box for the game, where it mentions spreading democracy with overpowered weapons, but right next to it, it also says work as a team to overcome impossible odds, which I will admit works well when and if you have a coordinated squad using mics and planning out attacks and loadouts. But here's a flaw in Kai's thinking, and I see this a lot because I do this all the time, and it comes down to matchmaking and the average gamer or consumer that actually buys and plays Helldivers 2. You see, I'd venture to guess that for the majority, and I hesitate to say vast because I honestly don't know, but I guess that for most players that play Helldivers, they have limited time to do so, and they don't want the added pressure of speaking with randoms in the matchmaker, and they just want to kind of boot up the game, slap on some gear, and for them, get wrapped up in the coolest aspects of Helldivers, which is shooting lots and lots of things. It's basic gaming enjoyment, man, and along the way, there's some massive explosions, there's some random deaths. They might make it off the planet, they might not. They finish up a couple of campaigns, and then they turn off their systems for the next however many days or weeks. For this majority, it's not about difficulty. It's not about collecting samples. It's not about pulling off a gambit or what weapon was just nerfed or buffed while also buffing an enemy to compensate against it. They just want to log on and have the game feel fun and give them a sense of power, while also not hard locking their PCs or dropping down to frames that are in the teens every time a big explosion goes off around them. Personally, and I'm speaking from experience here, I drift between these two expectations for the game. I absolutely feel that the game should embrace the fun factor element above all else. In fact, now that I think about it, in all of the dev vlogs, videos, and presentations that I've sifted through, fun or fun factor is not a term I can remember them using. Instead, they always reference the game's core vision, which we heard from Pilstead earlier what that is. Anyways, tangent over. Let's get back to it. Arrowhead sold 20 million copies and became Sony's fastest selling game of all time, not because it was this super niche, hardcore Tarkov in space experience. It's actually quite the opposite. It was fun, shooting lots of things and feeling like our efforts meant something in the broader galactic efforts that actually attracted so many players to the game. I also feel like there's a more difficult experience to be had for those that could actually engage with it, and if Arrowhead took the time to make it. But first, they have to get away from creating difficulty through tedious design efforts. Buffing enemies into higher and higher levels of bullet sponges while simultaneously nerfing our weapons to feel worse to use is not how you create difficulty. I've seen games try it, and it kills the flow of the combat, and player excitement levels go from a 10 down to a 0 overnight when studios try this. You can make more intense situations, which also adds to the perceived difficulty, by just giving us more things to shoot at. Again, it's one of the core drivers for why players bought the game. The box references impossible odds, which for many means more hordes of baddies, not less things to shoot at, but everything you get to shoot at has hidden factors like extra durability, extra armor plating, and debuffs, which make them less fun to shoot at and more of a chore. And guess what? The more tedious the enemy design is, the more of those we're going to send your way. The future of Helldivers 2 is not to embrace every single change the studio makes and to praise those changes as gospel, aka glazing the game. And I still can't believe that's a banned term. Anyways, because in reality, this studio makes a lot of stupid changes to the game. Let's just be honest here, especially when it comes to giving the majority of their players more of what they want, instead choosing to sacrifice all of that success for their self-described grunt fantasy. But I also think there's a slim way forward here where they can create interesting gameplay and dynamic combat situations with unique enemy designs and encounters, free from making enemies tougher and boring to shoot at. But it involves them burning those spreadsheets and nerfs disguised as buffs philosophies, because as we've seen this time and time again, when these two studio factions went out and they get their way, swinging the game wildly in one direction or the other, it creates this sense of player uneasiness. I'm a firm believer in change. I mean, it's one of the core philosophies of my YouTube channel, being an agent for change. And in the case of Arrowhead and Helldivers 2, I'd say that it's okay for them to embrace that change in the game's initial vision over to a more fun-paced design philosophy. It's what attracted me and millions of gamers to purchase this game. I mean, I absolutely adore coming out of a mission after firing 5,000 plus rounds, and I've racked up 1,300 plus kills while escaping situations that nobody should have a right to. The drama, pacing, and unique and stunning visuals make this game a winner. But this constant internal struggle to pull it back towards, as I've said many times here in this video, this niche Tarkov experience, it has to stop. If I want Tarkov, I can get that kind of unforgiving game experience inside of Tarkov. That's not what drove millions of purchases of Helldivers. The same goes for Arma or any of those other past influences Arrowhead drew upon for their inspiration. The game has given us a taste of what it can be when fun is prioritized above all else, and that feeling's intoxicating. Furthermore, difficulty can be achieved through unique challenges and numbers while foregoing tedium. I've been a part of communities where this method of balancing takes hold, where they choose to listen to only those that affirm the developer decisions, aka glazing. And I can tell you with 1,000,000% accuracy that it leads to a game's quick and untimely end. I mean, hell, Outriders comes to mind, where they chose spreadsheet balancing and not to take into account player feedback, along with a massive array of technical issues. Sound familiar? And in that isolation and living in an echo chamber of confirmation, that game and community died a swift death. Helldivers, despite seemingly having infinite lives and do-overs, also seems to show all those same familiar symptoms as Outriders, where spreadsheets and pick rates take precedence over all else, and where fun is a forgotten concept. And in the end, it may be balanced internally to what the developers see as their ideal vision for the game. The only problem is the players and their loyal supporters left long ago, leaving the studio alone to enjoy their creation. I'd like to thank all my current channel members for your continued support. If you happen to like the video, please hit subscribe and ring the notifications bell to receive my future upload alerts. And until the next one, this is LtBuzzLitebeer, signing off.